There's a scene I want you to picture, not a flashy one, not a dramatic one with swelling music and slow motion and all the production signaling you've been trained by years of television to expect when something important is about to happen. Just a man, sitting in a dim apartment, a camera propped on something across the room, recording him. He looks completely ordinary, dark hair, glasses, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd if you saw it on the subway. Nothing about him looks dangerous. Nothing about him looks like someone you'd spend the next decade of your life thinking about. Nothing about him looks like a villain, or a monster, or even a character in a show. He's just a man with a camera. And he clears his throat, and he looks at the lens, and he says, quietly and carefully, like someone who has thought about these words beforehand and decided that getting them right matters more than anything else available to him right now. Hello, my name is Simon Petrikov. I am recording this tape so that people will know my story, and that is the moment. That is the exact, precise, pinpoint moment when Adventure Time cracks itself open and shows you what it has been doing this whole time. That single, plain sentence, the most ordinary possible framing for a character introduction, the least dramatic thing a person could possibly say, is the show saying, okay, you thought you knew what this was. You don't. You've been watching the wrong thing. Let us show you what you've been watching. I have been wanting to make this video for a long time, longer than I've wanted to make almost anything on this channel, because Simon Petrikov is one of those characters who got into me when I was young. And by young, I mean I watched that episode for the first time as a teenager, and I remember exactly where I was sitting, and I remember the specific full-body stillness that happened when it landed, the thing that happens when a piece of art gets to you before your brain has finished deciding what to think about it, and he has never left. Every time I come back to this story, there's another layer, something I hadn't processed, a connection I'd made but not fully examined. When I sat down for this video and went through every relevant episode back to back across a week, going through the wiki and the production notes and the commentary and the critical reception and the fan analysis and the Fiona and Cake breakdown, I found things I'd somehow never fully put together, even after years of thinking about this character. And I want to walk through all of it tonight. Here's what we're doing. We're going through the complete arc from start to finish. The whole thing, nothing skipped. We're starting with why the show spent 3 seasons training you to dismiss the Ice King before it showed you who he was. We're going through the tapes in real detail, not just the final tape, but what the tapes as an artifact mean, what the production decisions behind them tell you about the show's values. We're going through the Mushroom War and what Simon did in those 1,000 years, specifically the story of a 7-year-old girl in ruins and an office chair and a Cheers theme song. We're going through I Remember You, which I think is one of the finest pieces of emotional storytelling in animation history, full stop. We're going through Betty and what Betty jumping through that portal without hesitating means about who she is. We're going through the finale and what it costs and what the universe says when Simon goes to Prismo with his basketball hoop. And then, because this is the part I don't think gets talked about enough, because I think most conversations about Simon stop at the finale and leave half the story on the table, we're going through Fiona and Cake, all of it, because Fiona and Cake is the piece that makes the whole arc make sense. It's the piece that asks the question the original series never had enough time to sit with. What does it actually look like when someone survives the thing that was supposed to destroy them? What does freedom feel like when you weren't supposed to get it? And what do you do with yourself when the person who sacrificed everything to give you that freedom is gone? So get comfortable. Seriously, actually get comfortable. If you're watching this late at night, which I suspect many of you are, get the blanket, find your position, turn the brightness down to wherever it sits right for you. We are going to be here for a while, and this one deserves the time and the attention. Simon Petrikov deserves it, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's how we keep making these. It costs you nothing, and it means more than I know how to say properly. Adventure Time premiered on Cartoon Network on April 5th, 2010. Pendleton Ward created it. It started as a short that aired on Nickelodeon in 2007, which went viral online. This was early internet virality, the kind that happens through word of mouth and embedding, and people emailing links to each other. And the response was large enough that Cartoon Network came to Ward and said they wanted a full series. He pitched it, they ordered it, and on April 5th, 2010, 12 minutes of Adventure Time aired after the Super Bowl of kids television, which is to say, after the finale of another extremely popular kids show. They got eyes on it immediately. And for the first couple of seasons, the Ice King was exactly what he appeared to be, which was not very much. The recurring villain, the one who showed up, made things inconvenient, got defeated, and shuffled away. Tom Kenny's performance was precisely calibrated for this. This wobbling, self-important, vaguely ridiculous old man in blue robes who kidnapped princesses and gave speeches to no one and made up elaborate internal stories about how the princesses secretly loved him and just needed time to understand that. He threw snowballs at children. He composed terrible romantic poems that he recited to an uninterested audience. He had feuds with Finn and Jake that were asymmetrical in the most specific way. Finn and Jake found him irritating. The Ice King found them mortal enemies worth devoting a significant portion of his emotional life to. And you tuned him out. The show was teaching you to tune him out. This is the part I want to make sure you understand, because it's the part that makes December 5th, 2011 work as well as it does. The dismissal of the Ice King was not an accident. It was not lazy writing. It was a deliberate, patient, 3-season investment in making you find him tiresome. The writers, Ward, Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, the whole writer's room, were building a relationship between you and this character. Not building it up. Building it in a very specific direction that would make the reset hit as hard as possible when the reset came. Think about what 3 seasons of a kids' show means in terms of audience relationship. Adventure Time's early audience were children. These kids spent 3 seasons watching this sad, bumbling old man be a nuisance and get defeated. They laughed at him. They rolled their eyes when he showed up again. They internalized him as the least threatening of adversaries. And that internalization is load-bearing. The show was filling a tank. It was pouring 3 seasons of dismissal and eye-rolling and mild irritation into a vessel. And on December 5th, 2011, it opened the valve and poured something completely different through the same pipe. The contrast is the point. The fact that you'd spent 3 seasons finding him tiresome is what makes the tapes land. Holly Jolly Secrets is the 19th and 20th episodes of the 3rd season of Adventure Time, aired as a half-hour holiday special on Cartoon Network on December 5th, 2011. Written and storyboarded by Kent Osborne and Somvele Xiophone, from a story developed by Mark Banker, Kent Osborne, Patrick McHale, and series creator Pendleton Ward. Directed by Larry Leichlitter, with Adam Muto as supervising director and Nick Jennings as art director. The episodes hold an 8.7 on IMDb for 2 11-minute segments of a children's cartoon airing in December. That is a number that tells you something is happening here that goes beyond category. The genesis of the episode tells you about the show's values. Cartoon Network wanted a Christmas special. Ward wanted to do something around Christmas without doing Christmas directly. He wanted the holiday's presence as atmosphere without leaning on its iconography. His first idea was a Mystery Science Theater 3000 riff. Finn and Jake at home watching actual Christmas specials and doing commentary over them. This would have required mixing live-action footage, real Christmas specials, into the animated world of Ooh. Ward rejected this himself, not because the network told him no, but because the mixing of live action and traditional animation would have broken the internal reality of the world. It would have punctured the sense, carefully constructed across 3 seasons, that Ooh is a complete place with its own physical laws and visual consistency. Ward wasn't willing to do that even for a comedy gag in a Christmas episode. That's a specific kind of artistic principle. Most showrunners in that position take the easy comedy route and deal with the consequences later. Ward didn't. Patrick McHale then proposed the Ice King's home videos. The logic is immediately clear. You've established that the Ice King has a strange and embarrassing private life. What if you could see it? What if Finn and Jake found a box of tapes at the dump that the Ice King had recorded of himself when he thought nobody was watching? The comedy almost writes itself. And then you have space, at the end, to do something else entirely. Ward, according to McHale, on the DVD commentary that Cartoon Network released with the complete 3rd season in 2014, called this idea brilliant, essentially as soon as McHale pitched it. Because it was. It was obviously right. And here is a production detail that I think reveals more about this show than almost any other. Adam Muto storyboarded a video in the episode that Finn and Jake fast-forward through. They're bored of the early tapes, and they skip ahead to find the good stuff. Standard comedy move. But because Muto was Muto, and this crew was this crew, that fast-forward section contains real, scripted, fully recorded, and animated content that plays perfectly at normal speed, but is inaudible at fast-forward. Fans extracted it years ago. If you slow down that section of the episode and listen at regular speed, you hear the Ice King delivering a complete monologue about his private life that includes him confessing that he loves to fill his bathtub full of milk and sit in it like a magic angel, and that when his own toes poke out from under the milk, they startle him and make him giggle. There's more. There's a whole miniature window into his interior life, embarrassing and strange and oddly human. Muto noted in commentary that this approach required 3 times the work. You need real footage at real speed for a convincing fast-forward effect to look correct. So they scripted, recorded, and animated an entire invisible scene at triple the production cost, specifically to make a throwaway joke feel real. Most animation studios would never do this. It would never pass a cost-benefit analysis. The fact that this crew did it anyway tells you that making the world feel complete, making the detail real even when no one would see it, was a value that operated at every level of production, not just when it was cost-effective. The comedy of the tapes before the last one is perfect, and I don't want to skim over it because the comedy matters. The first tape, the Ice King sitting alone in a room, weeping. No context, just weeping at the camera. BMO detects a code in the pattern of his tears. This is played completely straight, and when decoded, it turns out to be a picture of Gunter, his penguin. The code in his tears is a picture of his penguin. Jake finds this so funny, he's physically incapacitated. And he's right to find it funny. It is funny. It's the purest possible distillation of the Ice King's pathetic, solitary inner life. Alone in a room, crying, and the closest thing to a secret in his soul is how much he loves a bird. There's something almost beautiful about how naked that is, how unguarded. He's not crying about evil schemes or thwarted ambitions. He's just crying. And the deepest content of his subconscious is Gunter's face. Then there are tapes of him exercising, talking to himself about how tough and kingly he is while cycling through obvious insecurities. There's the tape of him hosting a penguin dance party that he has apparently choreographed and practiced. And then there's the one where he puts on a black wig to impersonate Marceline. Fry Song, originally performed by Marceline herself in the 2nd season episode It Came from the Nightosphere, and sings it badly while wearing the wig. Jake, watching this, is absolutely beside himself. This is the peak of Jake's investment in the watch party. He's barely holding together. And it is funny. It's objectively funny. The comedic construction of this private world is working exactly as intended. And then BMO puts in the last tape. There's no warning, no music change, no visual cue that says this part is different. The tape starts, and the static clears, and there's someone on screen who is not the Ice King. There's a man with dark hair and normal-coloured skin and glasses, sitting in an ordinary apartment with bookshelves and furniture that look like the world before the world ended. And Tom Kenny is doing something he has never done in 3 seasons of this character. He's quiet, not subdued, quiet. The specific quality of someone in possession of their own mind, choosing their words deliberately because the words matter and the window to say them is narrowing. And he says, "Hello, my name is Simon Petrikov. I am recording this tape so that people will know my story. Pendleton Ward in an IGN interview from March 2012, described recording the tape sequence with Tom Kenny and said it felt like such an authentic, old-time radio horror drama. Ward's exact words. And Kenny is delivering exactly that. There is a quality in that first line. I am recording this tape so that people will know my story. That reads as documentation. This is not a performance. This is a man who has decided that what matters right now is being clear, being accurate, being on record. He doesn't know who's watching. He doesn't know if anyone ever will. He is talking into the dark, toward a hypothetical future audience, because leaving a record is one of the last things he can still control. Simon explains what he was before the crown. An antiquarian, a specialist in ancient artifacts, someone whose professional life was organized around understanding old objects and what they meant and where they came from. He says, with a very specific kind of weight, he never believed in the supernatural. That weight is the weight of someone who now understands exactly how wrong he was and how much it cost him. And then he tells you what happened. He was on an expedition in northern Scandinavia. The show doesn't specify the exact year or exact location, deliberately. And he purchased a jeweled crown from an old dock worker. He brought it home. He showed it to his fiancée Betty, who the show at this point in the series has never mentioned, and who you have no context for. And then he put it on his head, just for a laugh or something. I've sat with that phrase for years. Just for a laugh or something. The or something specifically. The vagueness of it. The almost embarrassed quality, like he's describing a stupid thing he did that turned out to matter enormously, and he still can't quite believe that this is the way it started. There was no dark ritual. There was no ominous warning from the dock worker. There was no sense that this was a moment of consequence. Simon Petrikov put on a strange hat he bought on an expedition because he thought it might be funny to show his girlfriend. That's the whole origin story of 1,000 years of suffering and madness and loss. One impulse of ordinary human playfulness. The specific casual impulse that any of us might have had in the same situation. You find something weird, you put it on, you call it for a laugh. There is no version of this where Simon was reckless or greedy or ambitious. He was just a man who found a weird hat. What happened when he put it on? He lost consciousness completely. He blacked out. He has no memory of what occurred during the time the crown was on his head. He came back to himself, and the first thing he encountered was Betty's face. And he describes her expression as looking at him with such contempt. Just that word. Contempt. He doesn't describe what the crown made him do or say during the blackout. He doesn't know. He only has that expression to work from. Whatever she saw when the crown had him, whatever looked back at her from his eyes during those minutes, it was enough to make her leave. He put the crown in a safe. He tried to move forward. Betty left. He never saw her again. Not for 1,000 years. Think about what it means to spend 1,000 years not knowing what you did. That's the specific horror the show is building here. Not the transformation itself. Not the madness coming. It's that Simon never got to know what the crown made him do the first time. He woke up in his own apartment, and the woman he loved was looking at him like something she'd never seen before. Something frightening. And then she was gone. And whatever it was, whatever he became for those minutes, he carries the not knowing for 1,000 years alongside the knowing. The horror of having done something you can't remember and having to live with the face of the person who witnessed it. As the tapes continue, and the show is depicting multiple recording sessions across clearly days and then weeks, you watch the transformation in real time. Simon's skin in the footage is going. The colour is wrong at the edges, turning. His hair is whitening. His nose is beginning to elongate. And alongside the physical, the mental, he mentions the visions starting. The voices. The crown's pull increasing even when it's not on his head, which is perhaps the most frightening detail. The contamination spreading beyond the physical contact. He's documenting this with the care and precision of someone who has been trained to observe and record, whose whole professional life was about exactly this kind of documentation. He's dying, and he's filing a report about it. Kenny lets the roughness into the voice incrementally across these sessions. The care is still there. Simon is still trying to be clear, still trying to leave an accurate record. But the effort required to maintain that care is visibly increasing. The gap between "I am recording this tape" and the final tape is the show letting you watch someone lose ground, losing it in real time, across the space of a Christmas special. The final tape. Simon is barely there. The voice is fraying. And what he says is not a villain backstory. It doesn't provide origin for the Ice King. It's a farewell letter. He asks whoever might find the tape to watch over him. He says, "Just watch over me until I can find a way out of this labyrinth in my brain and regain my sanity." And then he says, "And this is the moment. This is the one I can't get past no matter how many times I've heard it. And then maybe Betty, my princess, maybe you will love me again. Please love me again, Betty." He's asking to be loved again. That's the last coherent thing Simon Petrikov says before the Ice King takes over. Not help me, not save me. Please love me again. After everything, after the transformation and the voices and the isolation and the loss, what he wants is what he had before. To be loved by the woman he lost. To have that back. To have someone look at him the way she looked at him before the hat. And then the tape ends. And the show cuts to the Ice King peering through the window at Finn and Jake. He saw the whole tape. He's been watching. His response to having just watched himself describe his own disappearance into madness. Pure delight about the visit. His response to the specific revelation on the tape. The humiliating secret it exposed. He weeps and says, "I used to wear glasses." That's what he took from it. He once wore glasses, and now he doesn't. And that's embarrassing. He is not capable of the rest. He is not capable of understanding that the careful man on that tape with the dark hair and the measured voice is him, was him, is still in there somewhere. He thinks they gave him a birthday present. Finn and Jake give the tapes back to him quietly. They don't say anything. The show gives them no lines here because there are no lines. They watched a man disappear. They're looking at where the man used to be, and the Ice King is just thrilled. "This is great, Finn. Thank you." The novelist Lev Grossman, in an NPR piece from 2013, said of this storyline, "My dad has been going through having Alzheimer's, and he's forgotten so much about who he used to be. And I look at him and think this cartoon is about my father dying." That's an exact quote. A man watching a Cartoon Network holiday special saw his father dying in it. The show accessed the experience of watching a mind go, of loving someone whose self is departing even as their body stays present, with such precision that it mirrored something a real person was living through in the real world. Eric Adams at the AV Club called the special a disturbingly intimate holiday special. Both words are right. Intimate, because it's private footage of a man at his most vulnerable, reaching toward an audience that may never see him. Disturbing, because you got there through a comedy Christmas episode about a sad old man's embarrassing home videos. The show held an 8.7 on IMDb. It aired to 2.513 million viewers. It was the first real indication to anyone outside the production that Adventure Time was doing something at a level categorically different from any animated kids show on television. Now, Holly Jolly Secrets is extraordinary, and it's the beginning, and it's not the full story, not even close. It tells you who Simon was before. It doesn't tell you what came after, what the 1,000 years between those tapes and the present day actually looked like, what Simon did with the window of relative lucidity that remained before the Ice King took over completely. The show spends the next several seasons filling that gap piece by piece, each new piece making the whole heavier, adding weight to what you thought you already understood. The Mushroom War happened. The show is deliberately vague about the specifics. The visual language of Ooh makes clear it was civilization ending, almost certainly nuclear, the world remade into something unrecognizable. Whatever it was, Simon survived it. The crown was keeping him alive through things that should have killed a human being many times over. This is the trade the crown demands, and the show is explicit about it. You get to live, and you give up who you are. The exchange is precise. Simon is alive because the crown needs a vessel. He is deteriorating because that's the cost. And somewhere in the rubble, not long after the war, Simon Petrikov found a 7-year-old child crying alone. Simon and Marcy is the 14th episode of the 5th season of Adventure Time. It aired on Cartoon Network on March 25th, 2013, paired with a rerun of I Remember You as a half-hour special. Written and storyboarded by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar. From a story by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward. It received a 9.7 on IMDb. It was viewed by 2.6 million people. And it earned a Primetime Emmy Award nomination for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program at the 65th Emmy Awards. It lost to the Mickey Mouse short Croissant de Triomphe, which I maintain is one of the more unjust Emmy outcomes on record. This was also the last episode Rebecca Sugar worked on before she left Adventure Time to create Steven Universe. She went out on this one. She left on an episode about a man losing his mind in the ruins of the world while trying to protect a child, and the child grew up to be Marceline the Vampire Queen, who is about 1,000 years old in the present day of the show. That's Rebecca Sugar's Adventure Time Farewell, a story about a father who couldn't stay, told from the perspective of the daughter 1,000 years later. When the production staff was pitching the storyboard for this episode to Cartoon Network, the internal shorthand they used, confirmed by Adam Muto in subsequent interviews, was The Road, except for kids. Cormac McCarthy's novel about a father and son in the ash of civilization, trying to stay human. The reference makes the episode's visual choices legible. The ruins in the flashback sequences don't get softened into the show's usual warmth. They look like ruins. The world is bleak in a way that the show earns specifically because it needs it. The bleakness is the setting in which Simon's warmth becomes visible. The darkness against which the Cheers theme becomes heartbreaking, instead of just funny. Simon in the flashback is 47 years old, according to the Adventure Time Wiki's timeline breakdown. His skin is already blue. His hair is already white. He's already fighting the crown constantly, using its power when absolutely necessary, and then wrenching it off and spending the next few minutes reassembling himself. The reorientation takes longer each time. The gap between Ice King and Simon is narrowing. And Marceline, 7 years old, watches this happen. She watches him go away and come back. She knows something is wrong, and she knows he's trying, and she loves him with the specific, complete, uncomplicated love of a child who has found someone to trust in the ruins of everything. There are so many small details in this episode that accumulate into something overwhelming. Simon, finding a motorcycle to carry Marceline to town, instead of making her walk, immediately losing control of it, then bailing out before it crashes into a wall and explodes. And his solution? He pushes her in an office chair through the ruins, scat singing to make her laugh. That's the response to an exploding motorcycle. He found an office chair, and he's making mouth music and pushing a sick child through rubble, because getting her to the soup is what matters right now, and this is what's available. The show trusts you to understand what it costs him. This is not free. He is doing this at a deficit, spending energy he doesn't have, on a body that's being held together by a curse that's also eating it alive. And he's making mouth music. The chicken soup detail. According to the TV Tropes breakdown of the episode, in early development, Simon was supposed to be searching for medicine. The crew changed it to chicken soup because searching for medicine was considered too dark for a kids' show. I love this detail so much. It tells you that the show was operating right at the edge of what it was allowed to be, and the production was aware of this and finding the places where it could stay honest while still airing on a children's network. The soup instead of medicine is funnier. Simon breaking into a locked empty shop to find that the shelves are bare except for soup-themed novelty gift cards is a genuinely good comedy beat. But it's also Simon improvising. He doesn't have the right tools. He has what he can find, which is almost nothing, and he does what he can with it, including explaining to Marceline as he breaks the window that vandalism is wrong. I've watched this scene probably a dozen times preparing for this video, and what strikes me differently now than it did earlier is the specific texture of the care Simon shows. He's not just keeping her alive, he's modelling things. He's explaining that vandalism is wrong while committing vandalism. He's teaching her ethics while running on the fumes of a mind that is actively being consumed. He's 47 years old, and he's doing his best to be a responsible adult presence for this child, in a world that no longer has responsible adults in it, knowing that his ability to be that presence is running out, knowing the clock is ticking, knowing every time he uses the crown is another piece of himself given over. He keeps going anyway. And then the song, the Cheers theme. Where Everybody Knows Your Name, by Gary Portnoy, released 1982, the opening theme of the sitcom Cheers, which ran on NBC from 1982 to 1993. Simon sings it twice in this episode. The first time, he's found a broken television in a ruined shop, and he holds it up like a screen, and he sings the piano intro, and then performs a little episode of Cheers for Marceline, doing the character voices, making it a whole production, complete with a squeaking sound for Norm entering the bar. This is comfort. This is the world before the world ended, compressed into a performance. Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. In a destroyed world where that is literally true, he's singing it to a 7-year-old because it's a piece of before. It's something recognizable. It's what he has. The second time, the crown is on. He has to use it to fight off the mutant ooze creatures threatening them, and the crown is pulling at him, and he's fighting it, and he sings the Cheers theme again, louder this time, more desperate, forcing the words into his mind like a lifeline. Making your way in the world today. He's not performing now. He's holding on. He's using the most ordinary piece of comfort available to him as an anchor against the thing that wants to take his mind. And it doesn't work. The show's own stage notes say it doesn't work. He sings it with everything he has, and the Ice King comes anyway, and he has to smash the crown off his head himself, and when he comes back he runs to get the soup. According to Rebecca Sugar's father, Rob, on his official YouTube channel, the use of the Cheers theme started as a placeholder in the storyboard. Sugar put it in as a temporary track while developing the episode. As the episode took shape, she decided to keep it. This required purchasing the rights to the original recording, an actual licensing fee, actual money spent on what had been a placeholder, because the specific song was right in a way that a generic TV theme would not have been. Adam Muto confirmed in interviews that, according to our new arrivals, the theme from the Mr. Belvedere sitcom was also in the running. Both options work at the concept level. TV theme from before the war, piece of the lost ordinary world. Cheers is right, because Cheers is about belonging, about wanting to be somewhere you're known, about the specific warmth of a place where everybody knows your name. And Simon is the most belongingless person in existence right now, singing a song about belonging to keep himself from disappearing. The end of the episode. Simon brings back the soup. Marceline tells him she loves him. He says, "I love you, Gunther." Her name. Not her name. The name of a penguin who doesn't exist yet, bleeding through from a future that's already forming around the present. He hears himself say it. He looks at her, and the episode ends on that beat. The wrong name. The beginning of the end. In the present of the episode, Marceline finishes telling Finn and Jake this story. She says they lived happily ever after, and there's something in how Olivia Olsen delivers that line. A specific quality that is not quite bitter and not quite sad, but is clearly performing okay in a way that understands. It isn't the full truth. She passes the ball to the Ice King, who dunks it cheerfully and says, "Oh, that's nice," about a story he doesn't know is about him. The episode ends on Finn and Jake watching him. They don't say anything. There's nothing to say. Kendra Beltran at MTV Geek wrote that the episode pushed Ice King and Marceline's history even more into the pits of your heart and twisted it ever so. The review from Adventure Time Reviewed called it one of the great episodes, focusing specifically on how the Cheers moment works, comedically and emotionally simultaneously. The New York Times, in a broader piece on Adventure Time's handling of difficult themes, cited Simon and Marcy as an example of the show's unusual emotional range for children's animation. The Emmy nomination came from the Television Academy, recognizing that this was animation operating at a level that transcended its usual category. Now I want to talk about the gap. The show is mostly silent about what came between the Simon and Marcy flashback and the present day, between young Marcy and the office chair and the wrong name, and the 1,000 years of Marceline growing up and becoming the vampire queen and carrying Hambo and occasionally seeing the Ice King wandering around Ooh without knowing who she was to him. The show gives you fragments, notes in the storyboard for I Remember You, that the flashback shown there, small Marceline and Simon in the ruins, was not their first meeting. Evidence scattered across multiple episodes that they spent an indeterminate period together before Simon had to leave. At some point, the transformation became too advanced. Simon became too dangerous. He was having blackouts he couldn't predict, losing time, coming back not knowing what he'd done. The thing that was most important to him, keeping Marcy safe, was being threatened by his own presence. So he left. The man who had kept this child alive through the worst period of her existence made the decision to stop being around her, because staying was becoming more dangerous than leaving. And Marceline was alone again. For the second time in her young life, possibly the third, the person she loved most left. And then she spent the next approximately 993 years, until the events of Adventure Time, carrying that. Every interaction with the Ice King in the early seasons of the show carries this context once you know it. The episodes in which she's mildly irritated by him. The moments where something is almost recognizable in her expression when she looks at him, and the show doesn't underline it or explain it. She knows who he used to be. She is looking at the ghost of the person she loved, and the ghost doesn't know her. That's the 1,000 years of Marceline's relationship with the Ice King. And that's the context you need in order to fully understand what I Remember You is doing. I Remember You is the 25th and penultimate episode of the 4th season of Adventure Time. It aired on Cartoon Network on October 15th, 2012. It was watched by 2.535 million people. It holds a 9.7 on IMDb. Written and storyboarded by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar, from a story by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward. The original working title was Help. Adam Muto has joked that the title was changed because of the Beatles song of the same name. I want you to hold Help as the original title for a moment because it describes the episode more accurately than the final title does. The episode is a distress call, not a dramatic one. A very quiet one, sent by a woman who has been sending it for 1,000 years to someone who can't receive it. Surface plot. The Ice King shows up at Marceline's house wanting to write a song. He's found some pages with interesting words on them. Poetic words, he thinks, good lyrics, and he wants to collaborate. He doesn't know what those pages are. He thinks he found something worth turning into music. Marceline, who is always performing a version of OK when she interacts with this person, that is not the full truth of what she feels, reluctantly agrees. The pages are letters. Letters that Simon Petrikov wrote to Marceline during the Mushroom War, during the period when the transformation was advancing, and he knew he was going to have to leave. He wrote them so she would have something in writing, so that when he became something else and stopped recognizing her, she would have the letters, which said, "This is not what I wanted. This is not who I am. The magic keeps me alive, but it's making me crazy. I need to save you. But who's going to save me?" The Ice King found these letters in his scrapbook. He'd been keeping them without knowing what they were, pressed between pictures of penguins and other things he'd collected. Just pages with what seemed to him like good writing on them. He thought he'd written them himself. He has no idea. The song they write is Remember You. Rebecca Sugar composed it. She wrote it, and she recorded the demo on an omnichord, a keyboard harp instrument that was popular in the 1980s, made by the Suzuki company, that produces a sound somewhere between an electronic organ and a harp. And here is the production detail that I find extraordinary. According to Rob Sugar, Rebecca's father, on his YouTube channel, while Sugar was pitching the song to the Adventure Time crew by performing it on the omnichord, the instrument started to lose battery power partway through. The sound went slightly wrong. The pitch shifted as the power drained, and the crew realized in the room that the sound of the omnichord losing power, that specific slightly broken, slightly failing quality, fit the emotional register of the scene. They worked it into the final episode. The specific sound of the omnichord as you hear it in the aired version of I Remember You is Rebecca Sugar's instrument dying during the pitch. The instrument ran out of battery, and the crew understood that the failure was the point. So the Ice King plays drums. He's into it. He's keeping time. He's present. He's genuinely enjoying the creative collaboration. He has no idea what he's accompanying. And Marceline sings Simon's farewell letters, the last things he could articulate before the articulation went, aimed at the face that used to be his. She's singing his words at his ghost, and the ghost is playing drums and having a great time. There's a moment in the performance, the show marks it, where Marceline stops performing and is just in it, just singing, with the mask down. And Olivia Olsen's performance in this scene is one of the finest pieces of voice acting in this show's history. She's holding grief that has been building for 1,000 years. And as they sing, the episode cuts to the flashback that won't have its full context until Simon and Marcy airs 6 months later. Small Marceline in ruins, crying. Simon finding her, giving her Hambo, the bear that is her most prized possession, that she carries for 1,000 years, that she was heartbroken about losing in a later episode, that she had the button repaired on in memory of a memory, with such careful attention. That bear came from Simon Petrikov, found in a ruined toy store, pressed into a crying child's arms. Charlie Jane Anders at IO9, on the night the episode aired, wrote that the final scene made me lose my shit and keeps popping into my head. It's rare that any television show gets its hooks into your brain like that, but especially a kid's cartoon. The New York Times described the episode as a disquieting exploration of a painful relationship, serving as a potent metaphor for living with a relative suffering from dementia. The Guardian called it outright devastating. The AV Club gave it an A. 2.535 million people watched it. The Omnichord dying during the demo made it into the episode. The structural thing the episode does that I've never heard talked about directly. It inverts time. You hear Simon's words in the present, sung by Marceline in the present, before you see the moment those words came from. The grief before the loss, the farewell before the relationship. And the show doesn't annotate this or explain it. It just does it. The effect is that all the time periods exist simultaneously. The war and the apartment and the ruins and the present-day cave are layered on each other, which is exactly how grief actually works in the real world. You don't experience loss in sequence. You carry the past and present at the same time, inseparably. The original moment, and all the moments after it all present at once. When Finn and Jake burst in at the end to check on Marceline, Jake lectures the Ice King about harassment. The Ice King is baffled and slightly offended. He thought the session was going great. He was playing drums and everything. He doesn't understand what just happened in this room. Marceline watches him be confused and bumbling and entirely absent, and the episode ends. No resolution, no catharsis, just the ongoing reality of the situation, continuing. I've been putting off saying this explicitly, but let me say it directly now. Rebecca Sugar's contribution to the Simon arc is enormous, and I don't think it gets the acknowledgement it deserves in most conversations about this story. She wrote, I Remember You. She wrote, Simon and Marcy. Those two episodes together establish the emotional architecture of everything. The specific texture of what 1,000 years of grief looks like when you carry it as love rather than bitterness. The quality of Marceline's care for someone who cannot recognize her. The Cheers theme as an anchor against disappearing. The omnichord that loses power and becomes more honest because of its failure. All of that is Sugar's. And then she left to create Steven Universe, which is its own show that spent years thinking about grief and love and what it costs to care for someone who is in some sense gone. That through line is not incidental. It's the same mind working through the same questions in two different contexts, and Adventure Time is richer for the years she spent thinking about them there first. Now, Betty. Season 5, Episode 48 of Adventure Time. Aired February 24th, 2014. Guest starring Lena Dunham as Betty Groff. 9.1 on IMDb. Written and storyboarded by Ako Castuera and Jesse Moynihan, from a story by Kent Osborne, Pendleton Ward, Jack Pendarvis, Adam Muto, and Moynihan. This episode had been promised to fans at San Diego Comic-Con in 2012. The crew announced at a panel that a Betty episode was coming. So by the time it aired, there had been almost a year and a half of anticipation built up. Jesse Moynihan originally wanted it to be a double-length episode because the subject matter was dense enough to need the room. Because the season already had another double episode in production, he and Ako Castuera had to fit all the story into one bullet. Moynihan's stated personal intention for the episode was to convey the idea that for Simon, death was preferable to life as Ice King, but that love and sacrifice to another person could provide hope for a future. That's an exact quote from Moynihan. 11 minutes. That's what they were building in 11 minutes. Lena Dunham got cast because she and Kent Osborne were Facebook friends from the independent film scene. When the crew approached her, she was in production for Girls in New York and said yes immediately and recorded her lines remotely. Oliver Sava at the AV Club, reviewing the episode, said Dunham finds the emotional truth underneath the absurd situation to balance the drama and comedy of the script. Which is exactly right. The role requires you to play a woman who arrives in a completely foreign context, 1,000 years from her present, and who is simultaneously terrified and utterly certain about what she's doing. Dunham manages both. Here's what happens in the episode. In Wizard City, a secret society of wizards performs a ritual that accidentally facilitates the entry of an entity called Bella Noche, a misshapen head from another dimension made of pure anti-magic, whose presence drains all magic from everything it touches. The crown, stripped of its power, goes inert, and the Ice King collapses and becomes Simon. Tom Kenny doing the shift again. No fanfare. He just goes quiet. That specific taking stock quality, the careful assessment of a disorienting situation before deciding how to respond. Someone who has been somewhere else for a very long time. Simon figures out what's happened. Not just the Bella Noche situation, but the full scope of how much time has passed. How different the world is. What Ooh is, and what it means. He punches Ash, Marceline's ex-boyfriend, in the face to steal his magic carpet. I want to pause on this for a second, because it tells you something about Simon that is easy to miss. He's not passive. He's not gentle and frail. He's a 1,000-year-old man who survived the end of civilization, and he knows exactly how to handle an obstacle like Ash. He takes the carpet, goes to the Ice Kingdom, and finds something that the show has been waiting to reveal. A hidden room, preserved intact in the middle of the Ice King's castle, through 1,000 years of madness. Books, research, his old clothes, a photograph of young Marceline, preserved and untouched and waiting. Something kept that room. Some part of whatever remained inside the Ice King maintained that room without knowing why, kept it safe without understanding what it was for. That room is the show's most quiet piece of evidence that Simon never entirely disappeared. He calls Marceline. When she hears Simon's voice, not Ice King's voice, Simon's voice, she faints. She just goes over. This is the accumulated weight of 1,000 years landing all at once. He asks her to come and bring Hambo, the bear she's carried for 1,000 years, the one she had the button repaired on with such care. She sacrifices Hambo to fuel the ritual. She destroys her most prized possession because Simon asked her to, because that's what the relationship is. And she hears his voice. The portal Simon opens reaches back through time. His intention is only this: to apologize. He's dying. His body knows it's over 1,000 years old without the crown's magic sustaining it. And the one thing he wants to do with whatever time he has left is find Betty and tell her he was sorry for what happened on the night of the crown. Whatever he did, whatever she saw. He doesn't have a plan beyond that. He just wants her to know. Betty sees the portal. She's in her own present, before the war, living her life. She sees a portal open in front of her, and Simon's face on the other side. And she jumps, without hesitating, 1,000 years forward, into an unknown future, because Simon is on the other side, and that's all the reason she needs. The reunion, 30 seconds, maybe less. They see each other. They're looking at each other. And Dunham's delivery, she's not performing surprise or joy, she's just present, fully present. The person who jumped through a portal finally on the other side of it and taking in what she jumped into. And then death shows up because Simon is dying, and death exists as a character in this show, and there is a clock running. Betty's response to a crisis she has been in for maybe 90 seconds. She finds Bella Noche's true form, a small, skinny, effectively helpless man at the center of all those anti-magic crystals, and she beats him up with her hands. She has no magic. The anti-magic field takes nothing from her, because there is nothing to take. She locates the actual physical body through the crystals and gives him a thorough and unhesitating beating. She wins. The anti-magic field collapses. The crown's magic is restored. Simon starts to revert. He's looking at Betty when it happens. The show makes sure you see this. He's looking at her as the Ice King comes back, watching it happen, looking at her because she's the last thing he sees as himself. And then the Ice King is standing there, confused, no memory of any of it, wandering off. Betty is at the window, and she says, quietly, more to herself than to anyone, "I'm going to fix this." That's the vow. Not, "I'm going to try." Not, "I'll see what I can do." "I'm going to fix this." Said in full possession of, the curse is worse than she imagined. The world ended. The man she loves is gone inside his own body, and nobody has managed to fix this in 1,000 years. Betty says those 4 words with all of that information available to her. That is not optimism. That is something else. It's the specific quality of someone who has decided that trying is worth the cost, even knowing the odds. Because the alternative, walking away from Simon, from this, is not something she will do. Moynihan wanted to convey that love and sacrifice to another person could provide hope for a future. That line is that. Exactly that. Everything I've just described, compressed into 4 words. Betty's arc from this point forward, and I want to be specific about this because it matters for understanding the Fiona and Cake arc, is not triumphant. She spends seasons in Oo working to break the crown's curse, and the price of that work changes her. She becomes a wizard, acquiring Magic Man's hat in the Season 8 episode You Forgot Your Floaties, which aired September 19th, 2016. The transfer of that magic costs her. By the later seasons, Betty's mind is going the same way Simon's went. Not through memory loss and ice powers, but through obsessive singular focus, the narrowing of everything to one goal until nothing else registers, the gradual erosion of the self that existed before the quest consumed it. The show draws this parallel explicitly and carefully. Simon was consumed by a magical artifact trying to hold on to his world. Betty is being consumed by her own drive to restore his. The mechanism is different. The destination is the same. Love, pursued without limit, without the ability to say, "Enough, this is as far as I can go." The show is saying this clearly. Can eat you alive just as thoroughly as any curse. This is the piece that makes the finale's cost what it is. Betty doesn't arrive at the finale fresh and whole. She arrives at the finale already substantially consumed by the thing she's been doing for years. She summons Golb, not recklessly, but in an act that requires her to risk everything, which she is willing to do because she has already given everything to this. The finale is the final expenditure of a total commitment that started with 4 words at a window. Come along with me. The 4-part, 44-minute series finale of Adventure Time. Episodes 13 through 16 of Season 10. Aired September 3rd, 2018 on Cartoon Network. Watched by 920,000 viewers at premiere. Received a 10 out of 10 from Daniel Schindel at IGN, who wrote that it easily ranks with the best of Adventure Time's episodes, but more importantly, It acts as a perfect capper for the series. It's a thrilling exclamation point, an intriguing question mark, and a poignant, quiet period all at once. Oliver Sava at the AV Club gave it an A. Darren Franick at Entertainment Weekly gave it an A and gave the series overall an A+, calling his review, "One of the greatest TV shows ever, had a soulful, mind-expanding conclusion." It received a Primetime Emmy Award nomination for Outstanding Animated Program at the 71st Emmy Awards, the first such nomination in the show's history, and lost to The Simpsons' Mad About the Toy. The show gives you a flashback early in the finale. Simon and Betty before the war, in their apartment, making ice cream sundaes. Simon is reading about GOLB in one of his academic books. He says something to Betty about Golb, that Golb would say ice cream is without meaning, and Betty says, pouring more chocolate syrup, something like, "Good thing he isn't here then." They're just talking. It's a Tuesday evening, and they're making sundaes and talking about ancient mythology, and it's normal. It's before. I've watched that scene probably 30 times, and it hits differently every time. Because Golb is what ends everything. Golb is what Betty summons in the finale. Golb is what takes her from him. And once, it was just an interesting problem in a book. A good dinner table topic. Golb would say ice cream is without meaning. Good thing he isn't here. The distance between that apartment and the finale is the full length of the story. 1,000 years, the end of civilization, the Ice King, the tapes, the Cheers theme, the portal, the basketball hoop. And the show puts both endpoints in the same episode, so you feel the entire span of it. Betty summons Golb. She's working with King Man, formerly Magic Man, who has his own devastating backstory about a lost love that rhymes with Simon's, in a genuine attempt to harness Golb's chaos energy to undo the Ice Crown's curse. This is her plan, the convergence of everything she's been building toward for years. The problem? Golb is not a tool. Golb is a god, the embodiment of pure discord and chaos, operating on scales that have nothing to do with what Betty needs from it. Golb arrives in Oo and starts dissolving things, raising nightmare creatures, tearing at the fabric of reality. The Ice King approaches Betty in one of the moments of what might be near lucidity that stress occasionally brings. He tells her he's okay. He doesn't need this. She doesn't have to do this for him. Betty shoves him, hard enough that Ice King and Finn, who tries to intervene, and Betty herself all tumble into Golb's open mouth. Inside Golb, the entity functions as an identity purifier, stripping everything external, everything imposed, leaving only the essential form. The crown's magic goes. Betty loses the hat's magic. And the Ice King becomes Simon. Completely. Tom Kenny does the shift again, and it is exactly the same shift it has always been. The quiet, the taking stock, the careful assessment. Simon Petrikov. Finally. And Betty is Betty. Clear, present, entirely herself. They're together. For a few minutes, maybe less, inside a chaos god, inside the apocalypse they've been circling for 1,000 years. They are Simon and Betty. The people from the apartment, the people with the Sundays and the Tuesday evening. And then BMO starts singing outside. Marceline figures out that GOLB's power derives from chaos, and that musical harmony is the opposite of chaos. BMO's song weakens the entity. Bubblegum organizes everyone to sing. The residents of Oo, enemies and allies, singing together in the ruins of a war that hadn't quite finished. The harmony opens a hole. Finn comes through. Simon comes through. Betty stays behind. She sees the crown. Stripped to its essential form, the crown has reverted to what it actually is. a wish-granting artifact. It grants the truest wish of whoever wears it. Betty understands immediately. She's spent years studying magic. She knows exactly what this is and what she's going to do with it. She tries to wish Golb away. It doesn't work. Golb is too fundamental a force. And then she makes her truest wish. After everything, after all of it, her truest wish is: keep Simon safe. Protect him, no matter what it costs. The crown takes it. Betty fuses with Golb. The merged entity exits the planet. The crown falls to the ground. And Simon stands outside, looking up at a closing portal, calling her name. He is Simon Petrikov. Completely, finally, freely, Simon. And the person he wanted to be free with is gone. Marceline puts her arm around him. And that is where the Adventure Time series leaves him, free, alive, alone, in the rubble of one more thing that ended. The finale montage shows us Simon going to Prismo. Prismo is the most powerful granter of wishes in the show's cosmology. If anyone could retrieve what Betty became from wherever she's gone, it's Prismo. What Prismo gives him is a small wastebasket with a miniature basketball hoop. The same thing Magic Man received when he tried to wish back his late wife Margles. The callback is deliberate. The universe saying no, and Prismo visibly sorry about it, and the answer being no anyway. Some costs cannot be refunded. Some things, once given, are gone. The basketball hoop is devastating in its smallness. After everything. After the tapes and the letters and the Cheers theme and the portal and 4 words at a window. The universe gives him a miniature basketball hoop, and he has to take it and go home and figure out how to be Simon Petrikov in a world that Betty died to give back to him. Adventure Time. Fiona and Cake. Premiered on Max, not Cartoon Network, Max, on August 31st, 2023. Received a TV 14 rating compared to Adventure Time's TV PG. 10 episodes. The showrunner was Adam Muto. Rebecca Sugar, Somvele Xylophone, and Patrick McHale returned to write songs. The first season premiere is titled Fiona Campbell. The second episode is titled Simon Petrikov. The 10th episode, the season finale, is titled Cheers. Every other episode is named after a character. The finale is named after a TV show. I want to say, and I want to say this directly, I think Fiona and Cake is the most important thing the Adventure Time franchise has done for Simon Petrikov's story. Not the most dramatic piece. Not the most emotionally wrenching single moment. The most complete. The piece that makes the whole arc make sense by asking the question the original series never had enough time to sit with. Simon Petrikov, the second episode of Fiona and Cake's first season. It's set some years after the finale. Simon is free. He has been free. And he is, with a specificity the show renders beautifully and without sentimentality, depressed. Not dramatically, not in crisis, just grey. The particular heaviness of someone who survived the worst thing and is now doing the work of being alive again and finding it harder than expected. He lives in a small exhibit on the human island in U, an exhibit about 20th century human life. He opens it every day and explains what a telephone was, what coffee was, what the objects of the lost world meant. Astrid, the small girl dressed as Fiona, asks if he's going to write more stories. He doesn't want to talk about the Ice King's fan fiction. Aligning himself with those stories means aligning himself with a version of himself he's trying to separate from. And he hasn't figured out how to do that yet. He goes to a bar. The bartender puts ice in his drink, and Simon flinches. He finds Betty's picture in his wallet and doesn't know what to do with it. He talks to Finn, older now, tattooed, visibly the years, and says he can't relate to anyone in Oo anymore. He's a 20th century man. He's a dinosaur. And then he says he misses being the Ice King sometimes. Not the curse. Not the madness. He misses the simplicity of not knowing what he'd lost. The Ice King walked around Oo without 1,000 years of grief sitting on his chest every morning. He didn't see ice in his glass and flinch. He didn't find a picture and not know what to do with it. The madness was protecting him from all of this, and now he has to carry all of it. And it's heavier than he was prepared for. This is the most psychologically precise thing the show has ever done for Simon. It names accurately what recovery from something massive actually involves. The fog you were inside, in all its horror, was also protecting you from things you now have to feel. Coming out is not just freedom. Coming out is also encounter. Simon is encountering everything the Ice King couldn't reach, every morning, and doing it with a body and a life that are both fundamentally disoriented in a world that moved on without him. The season is a multiverse chase involving Fiona and Cake, whose universe turns out to have been stored in the Ice King's imagination and gets accidentally released into real Oo when Simon's ritual goes wrong. The villain is the Scarab, a cosmic auditor who wants to erase Fiona and Cake's world for being non-canonical. The Scarab is the voice that says some things don't deserve to exist. Some lives aren't valid. Some stories can be erased because they fall outside the approved structure. Simon Petrikov, who spent 1,000 years erased from himself, is not going to cooperate with that voice. And then the finale. Cheers. September 28th, 2023. The title derived from the TV show that appears on Fiona and Cake's television in their world, whose theme has played quietly in the background of this entire story since Simon sang it in ruins to a 7-year-old. The Cheers theme heard in Simon's apartment when he turns on the TV in episode 2. Cheers playing on Fiona's TV. And now the season finale is called Cheers. Every time the show uses this reference, it's reaching back to that office chair in the rubble, to the man scat singing to keep himself present, to the most ordinary possible anchor against disappearing. Gol Betty transfers Simon's consciousness into Shermie, the young cat boy from the far future framing sequence of the original finale. As Shermie, in a far future library, Simon encounters a choose-your-own-adventure holographic book called Casper and Nova. The Adventure Time wiki confirms that the cover of the holobook is identical to a book visible in the Simon Petrikov episode. It's a real book. A book Simon is going to write. Casper and Nova. Simon and Betty, barely renamed. And Simon works through the book's choices, and he sees the pattern. Every time the book offers Casper a fork, stay or go, come with me or let me leave, Casper chooses to stay, chooses to keep Nova close, chooses his desire for her presence over her freedom to pursue her own life. There's a specific moment, a bus stop. Nova is going to Australia to look for petroglyphs. It's her research, her work, important to her. And Casper talks her out of it. Warmly, affectionately, probably without realizing what he's doing. He keeps her home. He substitutes his desire to have her near for her freedom to go where she needed to go. The Looper review of the finale confirms the detail. If Simon let Betty go on her trip to the outback, or even went with her as a more mutually supportive way of starting the romantic relationship he was seeking, then it's possible his own research wouldn't have led him to the Ice Crown in the first place. And Simon realizes, that's him. That's the shape of it. He loved Betty so completely that he sometimes couldn't fully see her as a separate person with her own direction. The love was real. It was also, in this specific dimension, incomplete. Both things are true at the same time. And Simon has to receive that information about himself, has to let it be true about him, about them, about a love story the show has been treating as beautiful, and is still treating as beautiful, because it was beautiful, and it was also this. He meets Golbetty, the chaos god who contains Betty, and Golbetty tells him she doesn't regret any of it. He was a wonderful experience. She wouldn't undo their choices. And then she gets on the bus, and the destination on the sign changes to something Simon can't read, and she's gone, and Simon has to let her go, not because the love is diminished, but because she's asking him to. She's saying, as clearly as she can, receive what I gave you. Stop trying to undo it. Be Simon Petrikov in the world. That's what she needs from him. That's the thing she always needed from him. He throws the crown away. He passes Fiona and Cake's universe through a portal as a dandelion, gives it to Fiona, lets her blow the seeds so the universe belongs to the people who live in it. He stops trying to carry everything alone. The final montage of the season. Simon writes a book, not Fiona and Cake stories. Casper and Nova. A choose-your-own-adventure book about two characters who are clearly him and Betty, with multiple paths and multiple choices, and a story where sometimes it goes differently, where Casper follows Nova onto the bus, where the people in the story get to choose, and the choice leads somewhere that doesn't end in ruins. He gives his characters what he never had. He makes a world with infinite possibilities, and the Adventure Time wiki notes that it's implied Astrid, the small girl from episode 2 who asked about the stories, is the one who eventually creates the Casper and Nova holobook that Beth and Shermie read in the far future. Simon's stories became Astrid's stories, became a book in a far future library. Simon Petrikov, who recorded his own disappearance on tape so that people would know his story, made something that lasted 1,000 years. He put it in the world. It stayed. The episode is called Cheers. Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. In a destroyed world, where that was literally true, a man sang that to a child in an office chair, and it was the most human thing available to do. And at the end of everything, the title of the season finale is the name of the song he sang then. The show is reaching all the way back to the beginning, to the most ordinary possible anchor, and saying, this is the through line. This is what he has always been. The man who did what he could with what he had. The man who kept showing up. I've been sitting with Simon Petrikov for a long time. For years. And here's what I keep coming back to. What I keep trying to articulate, and never quite nailing. The thing at the center of his story is insistence. The tapes were an act of insistence. He was being erased, involuntarily, irreversibly, without his consent, and the tapes were the thing he could do about it. He could leave evidence. He could say, there was a person here. A man who bought a weird hat and put it on as a joke and lost everything he was, and he wants you to know his name was Simon Petrikov, and he was real, and he loved someone, and he's asking you to forgive him. And it worked. Marceline remembered. She remembered for 1,000 years. She carried the picture of who he was when he couldn't carry it himself, when there was nothing left of him, except an old man in a robe who didn't know he'd once worn glasses. She held the flame. She kept the memory alive long enough for him to come back to it. That's the relationship at the center of this story that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the romance with Betty, though that romance is extraordinary. The father-daughter bond with Marceline, which wasn't called that but was that. The relationship that survived 1,000 years of him being unrecognizable to himself. The relationship that Marceline sustained unilaterally, without any reciprocity possible, for almost her entire life. She is the reason this story has a shape. She held the shape until he could hold it himself. And Betty, who jumped through a portal without thinking, who said, I'm going to fix this, in possession of all the evidence that it was unfixable, who loved him so completely that the love consumed her, who in the belly of a chaos god for a few minutes was entirely herself, and who chose his safety with her last and truest wish. The show is honest that Betty's love was also incomplete. She cancelled Australia. She consistently placed herself second. She sacrificed in ways that Simon didn't always fully see. Both things are true simultaneously. The love was beautiful, and the love was imperfect. That's not a contradiction. That's just love. And Simon, who made it, who came out the other side of 1,000 years of erasure, who carried the grief of the basketball hoop and the ice in the glass and the picture in the wallet, who learned something about himself from a choose-your-own-adventure book about people named Casper and Nova, who sat down and wrote the book with multiple paths and gave his characters the choices he never had, and put it in the world. And it lasted. He made it. Not intact, not unscathed, not without enormous loss, but he made it. And then he did what he could do with what he had, which is what he has always done. From the office chair in the ruins to the choose-your-own-adventure book about what could have been different. He kept showing up. He kept showing up. In whatever ruins he was standing in, for whoever needed it, with whatever he had. I don't have a clean bow to put on this. The story doesn't have one, and I wouldn't want to pretend it does. What it has instead is honesty. It has the specific honesty of a story that was willing to follow its characters all the way through to the difficult parts, to sit with what recovery actually looks like, instead of just depicting the moment of freedom, to acknowledge that surviving the worst thing and being okay are not the same thing, and that the gap between them is where the real work is. That's what Fiona and Kate gave us. That's what the original series was building toward, without knowing it had this piece waiting. Simon's arc is complete, not because everything is resolved, but because he arrives at something real. The capacity to let go of the thing he was trying to fix, to receive what Betty gave him, rather than spending the rest of his life trying to undo it. To write a story with infinite possibilities about two people who loved each other imperfectly. That's the completion, not resolution. Honesty about what the situation actually is, and the choice to live in it instead of against it. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I mean that. This one mattered to make, and I'm glad you were here for it. If you haven't subscribed, it helps more than I can properly express. It's how we keep making these, and I'm grateful for every single person who shows up for them. And if you can't sleep after this, well, that's possibly Simon's fault. He's been keeping people up for years. The next video will be here when you're ready. Take care of yourself. Truly. Good night. Extension block A. Insert after. 3 seasons of a kids show means in terms of audience relationship, paragraph. And I want to give you a specific example of how this dismissal was constructed, because I think the mechanism is genuinely interesting. It's not just that the Ice King was annoying. Lots of recurring villains in kids' shows are annoying. The specific quality of the Ice King's annoyingness was that it was rooted in something recognizable. The specific exhausting quality of someone who is very invested in a conflict that nobody else cares about. He had feuds. He had grievances. He kept score on slights that everyone else had forgotten. And the show kept returning him to the screen with this quality fully intact, this sense of someone who believes the stakes are much higher than they are, who is performing significance in a context that finds him irrelevant. The episode Prisoners of Love, which aired on April 19th, 2010, just the 4th episode of the whole series, has the Ice King kidnapping a collection of princesses and Finn and Jake rescuing them. Standard setup. But what the episode does with the Ice King in the meantime is let you watch him interact with the princesses, and what you get is a portrait of someone who has built an elaborate internal narrative about what he wants and what he deserves and what the princess's resistance actually means. A narrative that has no relationship to the reality of the princess's experience. He's not threatening. He's just relentlessly, exhaustingly committed to his own fantasy. And by the end of the episode, when Finn and Jake have defeated him and the princesses are free, the Ice King is just still there. Still himself. Still convinced that this will eventually work out. The show did this over and over across 3 seasons. It kept showing you the same dynamic from slightly different angles, kept reinforcing the sense of the Ice King as someone trapped in a loop of his own making, someone who had decided that what he wanted was princesses and was pursuing that with the dogged commitment of a person who has forgotten to question their own premises. And you found him tiresome. Not hateable. He wasn't threatening enough to hate, just tiresome. You groaned when he showed up. You were already composing your sigh before he had finished his first line. That's the investment the show was making. 3 seasons of accumulated mild irritation, building pressure in a vessel. And on December 5th, 2011, it opened the vessel. There's also something worth saying about Tom Kenny's performance across those 3 seasons, because the way he played the Ice King during this period is both a comedy achievement and a feat of continuity that only makes complete sense in retrospect. Kenny built the Ice King's voice on a very specific set of qualities. The theatrical wobble, the tendency to pitch upward at the ends of sentences like someone performing importance, the particular quality of someone who is always slightly more invested in the moment than the moment warrants. It's a recognizable caricature of someone whose relationship to reality is slightly askew. And Kenny maintained all of that consistently across seasons of weekly appearances without ever dropping anything that would signal that something deeper was being built. Because of course something deeper was being built. Kenny knew. The crew knew. But the performance never telegraphed it. You never watched an early Ice King scene and thought, there's something more here. You just saw the wobble and the theatrical petulance, and you made your mental note that the Ice King was here again, and sighed. That's a performance discipline that is easy to underestimate because the reward for it, the payoff of the contrast, doesn't arrive for 3 years. Extension. Block B. Insert into I Remember You section, after the production notes about the omnichord. I want to tell you about the visual language of the duet scene specifically, because the storyboarding choices in that sequence are as important as the musical ones. The scene is mostly shot in medium and close-up, staying very close to both characters' faces. This is a deliberate constraint. The episode could have used the space to show us more of Marceline's house, more of the environment, but it keeps pulling back to the faces, because the faces are the whole story. The Ice King's face, which is the face of someone who is genuinely enjoying a creative session. He's into it. He's drumming. He has the expression of someone doing something they like with someone who is okay. He has no idea. And Marceline's face, which is the face of someone doing the opposite of okay, and trying to perform okay, and periodically failing at the performance in small ways that the show doesn't dramatically underline, but which are there if you're watching. There's a specific moment, it comes about 2/3 of the way through Remember You, where Marceline's voice cracks. Not dramatically, not in a way that's designed to signal emotional moment to the viewer. Just a small crack in a note that might be Olivia Olsen's performance choice, or might be the character unable to fully maintain the mask. The show doesn't cut to a reaction shot, it just lets the crack happen and continues. And if you blink, you miss it. But if you catch it, it recontextualizes the entire rest of the scene. You understand that this performance of okay has been costing her something the whole time, and that she's been paying the cost, and that the cost is becoming visible in small ways she can't fully control. The flashback structure in this scene is also worth examining. The cuts to young Marceline happen during the sung sections, specifically during the most emotionally dense lyrics, the parts that are most directly about loss and memory, and the failure to save someone. The show is cutting to the images that correspond to the emotional content of the words. This is standard musical storytelling. But what makes it work here is that the flashback images are presented without any of the show's usual visual warmth. Small Marceline in ruins is not animated the way most Adventure Time flashbacks are animated. She's tiny in the frame, surrounded by destroyed world, and the color palette is cold in a way the show's present-day sequences rarely are. The show is not softening this. It's showing you the image of total abandonment. A child, alone, in the rubble of everything, and letting you sit in it. And then Simon finding her, giving her Hambo, and her face going from devastated to held. The bear is in her arms, and the world is still ended, but she has something. She has the stuffed animal, and she has the man who found it for her. And in a world that has literally nothing, that is everything. The juxtaposition between that image and the Ice King playing drums in the present is the whole episode. It doesn't need a speech. It doesn't need anyone to say, "This is what loss looks like." The show just puts both images in front of you and trusts you to feel the space between them. The Guardian's review of the episode called it outright devastating, and specifically noted the way the episode uses music and visual language in combination to avoid sentimentality while still hitting the emotional targets. That's precise. The episode is devastating without being sentimental because it never tells you how to feel. It just shows you the two images and leaves the distance between them for you to cross on your own. Extension Block C. Insert into Betty section. After the reunion scene, I want to talk about Betty Groff as a character in more depth than we've had room for so far, because I think she's one of the most interesting secondary characters in the franchise, and one who gets reduced to her sacrifice in most discussions when what she actually is more complicated and more human than that. Betty is, and the show establishes this very quickly in her brief appearances, extremely intelligent. She's an academic, a researcher, someone whose professional instinct when encountering a problem is to study it, document it, develop a theory, test the theory. When she arrives in the future through the portal, her response to a completely disorienting situation is to immediately start processing information. She's in an unknown time period, in a world that ended, and her first question to Marceline is essentially, "What happened? Tell me everything I need to know." She's building a working model of the situation before she's been in it for 10 minutes. This intelligence is what makes her so effective at the beginning of the quest to fix Simon. She doesn't have magic. She doesn't have resources. She has her mind, and her research training, and her willingness to work. And she applies these things with genuine brilliance to a problem that everyone else who has encountered it has effectively given up on. She becomes a wizard, not by being inherently magical, but by studying magic until she understands it well enough to acquire it deliberately. She builds an expertise in a field she had no training in because she needed it. That's not just love. That's a specific kind of disciplined, sustained intellectual effort that most people are not capable of. What's interesting about the arc of Betty's transformation, the way acquiring Magic Man's hat changes her, is that it maps onto something real about what happens to people who pursue a single goal for too long without enough of themselves preserved outside that goal. The obsession becomes the structure. The quest becomes the identity. Betty before the hat, even in the relatively brief glimpses the show gives us of her, has a personality that exists beyond Simon. She has warmth, humor, the specific social ease of someone who is comfortable in their own intelligence. After the hat, that's all narrowed down. The warmth is still there in traces, but it's being buried under the accumulation of years of single-purpose focus. She's becoming the quest, rather than the person pursuing the quest. This is not a critique of Betty. It's a description of what happens to people under certain specific conditions, and the show is not judging her for it. It's just being accurate. The cost of loving someone who is unreachable, of spending years trying to restore what was taken, of accepting that the work might require everything you have. That cost is real. Betty pays it in full, and the show is honest about what the payment does. The specific scene in the finale where Betty shoves the Ice King, when he approaches her to tell her she doesn't have to do this, is one of the most revealing moments in her arc. She shoves him hard enough that he falls into Golb's mouth. She shoves the person she has spent years trying to save, because in that moment, his presence and his voice, and his attempting to tell her to stop, are obstacles between her and the goal. The person has become the obstacle. The love has become the mission, and the mission has overridden the love. This is the furthest point of the transformation. Betty at the window saying, "I'm going to fix this," and Betty shoving the Ice King into a chaos god are the same impulse, protect Simon at all costs. But the gap between those two moments is the full length of what the years did to her. And then inside Golb, where she's stripped to her essential form, she's just Betty again. She's the person she was before the quest consumed her. And she and Simon are together, briefly, essentially themselves. I think the moment that is hardest to sit with, on reflection, is not Betty merging with Golb. It's the moment before it, when she sees the crown reverted to its wish-granting form and understands immediately what she's going to do with it. She makes the choice in the space of seconds, and the show doesn't give her a speech about it or a moment of anguished deliberation. She just sees the situation, understands what it requires, and acts. That's who Betty is. That's been who she was since she jumped through the portal without hesitating. She sees what's needed, and she does it. The scale of what's needed keeps escalating, from punching Bella Noche to 1,000 years of work to this. And she keeps doing it, not because she doesn't understand the cost. She understands the cost better than anyone. She does it anyway. Extension block. D. Deep expansion of the finale and Golb section. Let me tell you something about Golb that I think makes the Betty sacrifice more resonant than it might initially seem. Golb has been present in the show's mythology since before the finale. The entity appears in the 9th season and is referenced by the Lich in whispers. But what the show establishes about Golb's nature is relevant to what happens to Betty when she fuses with it. Golb is the embodiment of chaos and discord. This is stated explicitly in the finale. Golb is discord, Princess Bubblegum says, realizing that the gathered voices singing in harmony can combat its creatures. Golb's power comes from the disruption of order, from the incompatibility of things, from the state of things not being in harmony with each other. It is the opposite of music. It is the opposite of connection. It is the force that makes things not fit together, that separates, that dissolves. Now consider what Betty's truest wish actually does. She wishes to keep Simon safe at all costs. And because the crown grants the truest wish, it fuses Betty with Golb. It makes Betty and the chaos entity one thing. Betty's love, her truest wish, her fundamental orientation towards Simon's safety. This merges with the force of discord and separation. Love and chaos become one being, and the being exits the planet. There's something almost mythological about this. The force of love, of specific, costly, decade-spanning, everything-sacrificing love, fusing with the force of pure discord, and the resulting entity leaving, not destroying, not being defeated, leaving, like two incompatible forces reaching a synthesis that renders them no longer threatening, like the chaos being changed by what it absorbed. The Adventure Time CBR article on GOLB suggests that Betty's fusion may have transformed GOLB into something less malevolent than it was before. If that's true, and the show implies it is, then what Betty's love did to the Chaos God was change it. She didn't defeat it. She changed it. Her love is so fundamental that it altered a force of cosmic chaos. This might be the most unambiguously beautiful reading of Betty's sacrifice. She spent years pursuing a cure and never found one. What she gave Simon instead was different. By fusing with the entity that was threatening everything, she neutralized the threat and gave Simon his freedom simultaneously. She couldn't fix the 1,000 years. She couldn't undo the crown, but she could make sure the chaos that had been building toward this moment, all the chaos that the crown and the war and the madness had set in motion, ended at her. That she was the wall, that Simon got to walk away from it. And Simon calling her name as the portal closes is the image that all of this converges on. He's free. He's completely Simon, for the first time in 1,000 years, and he's standing in the ruins of U, calling after the woman who made it happen. Free and alone in the same moment. The freedom inseparable from the loss. I've thought about this a lot, about whether the Adventure Time finale is satisfying or sad or something more complicated than either. And what I keep landing on is that it's both, and that the bothness is the point. The show built Simon's story as a tragedy. A man consumed by a curse he didn't deserve, losing everything he was, losing the woman he loved, losing 1,000 years of his life. And then the finale gives him his mind back and simultaneously takes away the person who earned it for him. That's not a tidy resolution. That's life. That's the specific way that things can be both better and irreparably damaged at the same time. The show doesn't pretend the basketball hoop is fine. It doesn't wave away Simon's grief. It just says, this is where we are. And now what? The what comes in Fiona and cake. The what is grey mornings and ice in the glass and pictures in wallets you don't know what to do with. The what is the specific, unglamorous, undramatic work of being alive in a world that moved on without you. Expansion. Block E. The Crown. Insert between Simon and Marcy and I Remember You sections. I want to take a moment here and talk about the crown as a narrative object, because I think it gets treated primarily as a plot device when it's actually one of the show's most carefully constructed pieces of symbolism. And understanding what the crown is doing thematically changes how you read every scene that involves it. The crown is ancient. We don't know how old. Older than Simon's antiquarian expertise could easily date, which is saying something given his level of expertise. It grants ice powers and what the show characterizes as immortality. It keeps its wearer alive through conditions that should kill a human being, and it consumes the mind of whoever wears it. It replaces the self with something else. These are not incidental features. They're the crown's fundamental deal. The show uses this to talk about a specific kind of addiction, not substance addiction, but the addiction to something that keeps you alive while destroying who you are. The crown gives Simon life in exchange for his self. The trade is explicit, and Simon makes it again and again, Every time he puts the crown on in Simon and Marcy, knowing what it's costing him, unable to stop making it because the alternative is death. This is not a metaphor that requires extensive unpacking. It's right there. The thing that sustains you is also the thing that kills you. You can't have the sustaining without the killing. And the longer you use it, the more of yourself you've traded away, and eventually there isn't enough left to trade back. What's interesting about how The Crown is animated across the series is the way the show depicts its seduction. The crown doesn't feel like a threat when Simon is wearing it, at least not initially. In the Simon and Marcy flashback, when he puts the crown on to fight off the ooze creatures, there's a sequence where the Ice King's power is fully expressed, the ice blast going out in all directions, and the animation is spectacular. It's beautiful. There's something about the crown's power when it's fully unleashed that is genuinely impressive, and the show lets you see this even while making clear the cost. The crown is not purely ugly. It's not a rotten thing that no one would want. It's genuinely powerful, genuinely capable, and the beauty of the power is part of what makes the trade so seductive. You can see why someone in the post-apocalyptic ruins might keep putting it back on. You can see why Simon, who needed to protect a child and had nothing else to do it with, kept making the deal. The crown also has a will of its own, which the show hints at but never fully explains. It absorbs its wearers. The later lore developed in Fiona and Cake suggests that the crown contains within it the consciousness of everyone who's ever worn it. Simon has been in there, preserved, this whole time. Which means that the Ice King, that bumbling, sad figure who shows up every week to be defeated by Finn and Jake, was never entirely empty. Simon was always still in there somewhere, behind glass, watching, inaccessible but present. This is the piece that makes the early Ice King scenes recontextualizable in a way that is almost too much to process once you have it. Every moment the Ice King reaches for connection and fumbles it. Every moment he tries to get the princesses to love him, every failed scheme, every rejection, is that reaching happening in the context of a man who is buried inside a curse, who once loved someone with everything he had and lost her, and whose love has been distorted into this compulsive, inappropriate, misaimed thing that tries to find Betty in everyone it encounters. The Ice King's obsession with princesses. This is the thing that gets fully clarified when you have the Simon backstory. He's looking for Betty. He calls the women he's looking for his princess. Betty, Simon called my princess on the last tape. Betty, my princess. The Ice King is spending 1,000 years looking for the woman he lost, filtered through enough layers of madness that the original target is unrecognizable. But the impulse is still there. He wants to be loved. He wants Betty. He doesn't know that's what he wants because he doesn't know who Betty is. But the want is still running underneath everything, driving the behavior that the audience found tiresome, driving the schemes that always failed because they were always aimed at the wrong people. And Marceline knew this. That's the unbearable thing about I Remember You. Marceline knew that the Ice King's absurd attempts to kidnap princesses were the distorted echo of what Simon had lost. She watched him for 1,000 years trying to fill a hole he didn't know was there. She watched the person she loved become a shadow that kept reaching for something it couldn't name. And she couldn't tell him. She couldn't help him. She could only watch. There's a detail in the Adventure Time Wiki's breakdown of the crown's mythology that I keep coming back to. The crown apparently compels the wearer to learn the secrets of the ice and snow. This is described as part of how it works, a feature of the artifact rather than a side effect. The crown is teaching its wearer something. The madness isn't purely destructive, it's transformative in a specific direction. Simon is being turned into something that knows the secrets of the ice and snow at the cost of knowing who he is and what he was. The trade is, Give up yourself. Receive ancient cold knowledge. The crown doesn't take because it's evil. It takes because that's the exchange. The knowledge has to go somewhere. This makes the crown something stranger and more disturbing than just a curse. A curse is something inflicted. The crown is more like a contract. A badly designed contract with fine print that nobody noticed, but a contract. Simon entered into it the moment he put the crown on for a laugh. And the show is honest that the contract was always going to work this way, that there was no version where he put it on and nothing happened. The dock worker in Scandinavia knew what it was. The show never shows us that scene, but the dock worker knew. That's why he sold it. That's why someone always ends up with the crown. It finds new vessels, because it needs them. Expansion block. F. The 1,000 Years of Marceline. Insert before the I remember you. Detailed analysis. Let me stay with Marceline for a while. Because I've been talking about Simon, but Marceline is the character who carries his story between episodes, across seasons, through 1,000 years of airtime and in-world time. She is the living continuity of Simon Petrikov. Without her, his story has no witnesses. Without her, the tapes in the dump stay unplayed. Without her, the whole thing is just a man's private tragedy that nobody sees. Marceline the Vampire Queen is, in the present day of Adventure Time, about 1,000 years old. Half demon, half human. She's been alive longer than any other major character in the show, except possibly the Ice King. She has had an enormous, complicated, deeply documented history across the show and its various specials and comics and the Distant Lands series. And underneath all of it, underneath every relationship she's formed and every home she's moved into and every century she's navigated, is the fact that she grew up in the ruins of the world with Simon Petrikov, and she lost him, and she never stopped carrying the memory of who he was. The specific thing that makes Marceline's role in this story so meaningful is that it's completely unreciprocated for 1,000 years. She remembers Simon. Simon doesn't remember her. She has spent a millennium maintaining the image of who he was against absolutely no reinforcement. He can't confirm it, he can't validate it, he can't even participate in his own memory. She just keeps it. Because it's true. Because it happened. Because the man who pushed her through ruins in an office chair and sang cheers to make her laugh was real. And the fact that he doesn't know he was real doesn't make him less real. And she's not going to let that reality disappear, just because the only person who could remember it alongside her isn't capable of doing so. This is a kind of love that the show doesn't have a name for. It's not romantic. It's familial, parental in a specific way. The relationship of a child who was adopted by accident and formed the deepest bond of her formative years with someone she then had to lose. But it's also something that goes beyond those categories. Because most parents, even lost ones, leave something that can be acknowledged. Simon's departure was not clean. He didn't die. He became something else that still walked around with his face. And Marceline had to relate to that something else for 1,000 years while knowing who he used to be. In the episode Memory of a Memory from the 3rd season, which aired before the tapes episode, giving the audience this information without the context to fully process it yet, Ash tricks Marceline into reliving her earliest memory. It's a memory of young Marceline, somewhere in the post-apocalypse, with someone she calls Simon. You see his hand. You hear his voice calling to her. The memory is brief, and its full significance is opaque without the later episodes. But it's there. The show planted it. It put the Simon relationship into the show's canon in the 3rd season before the tapes episode aired, trusting that when people went back, they would find it. The Adventure Time. Wiki notes that in the storyboard for I Remember You, there are notes suggesting that the flashback shown in that episode the moment of Simon giving Marcy the bear, was not their first meeting. They had been together for some time before that moment, which means the bear giving is not the beginning of the relationship. It's a moment within a relationship that was already established. They'd been together in the ruins for long enough that she already knew him, already loved him, before he gave her Hambo. The bear was given in the context of an ongoing bond, which makes it even more precious. Not a stranger offering comfort to a stranger, but someone who is already hers, giving her something to hold on to. This context makes Marceline's grief about losing Hambo in the later seasons even more comprehensible. She held onto that bear for nearly 1,000 years. The episode Sky Witch in the 5th season has Marceline trading the most emotionally significant thing she owns, a shirt from Princess Bubblegum, to get Hambo back from a Sky Witch who had stolen it. This is how much Hambo matters, and you now understand exactly why. The show's treatment of Marceline's emotional landscape in relation to Simon is careful and specific across many episodes. She's not openly grief-stricken about it. She's had 1,000 years to develop coping mechanisms, and she's not the kind of person who displays vulnerability easily. But the grief is there, in a particular flatness that comes into her voice in certain contexts, a very specific quality that Olivia Olson uses that is different from her default register. It's the quality of someone talking about something they've had to make peace with, but that still hurts. Someone who has accepted a loss, without the loss having fully lost its sting. The clearest expression of this is in the framing scene of Simon and Marcy, where Marceline invites the Ice King to play basketball, and Finn and Jake ask her why. She says, "He's very dear to my heart. I love him." And the specificity of "very dear to my heart," which is not a construction Adventure Time characters normally use, it's more formal than the show's usual register, signals that this is a thing Marceline has had to think about carefully. She has had to develop language for what the Ice King is to her, because the language for it doesn't come naturally. He's not the Ice King to her, not really. He's Simon. But Simon isn't what Finn and Jake would understand by the name. So she says, "very dear to my heart." She found words for something that didn't have words. Expansion block, G, Fiona and Cake. Recovery arc, insert after the Simon Petrikov episode section. The Fiona and Cake season does something that I want to talk about more carefully. It structures Simon's arc as a 12-step process without using that language or that framework. It's not that the show is drawing directly on recovery literature. It's that the process it depicts, the specific sequence of realizations and moments of agency and letting go, maps onto what actual psychological recovery from trauma looks like in ways that are honest rather than schematic. The first thing the show does is let Simon be bad at being okay. Not dramatically bad, just the specific low-level badness of someone who is going through the motions. He's functioning. He has a job. He interacts with people. He goes to bars. But the bar with the ice in the drink is a scene that the show gives weight to. It's not a big dramatic moment. He flinches. Just a small flinch. The ice in his drink. The ordinary presence of cold in an ordinary context, and his body's involuntary response to it. That flinch is the whole show in miniature. The past not being over just because it's past. The 1,000 years still living in his nervous system, even though the crown is gone and the curse is lifted. The picture of Betty in his wallet is the same thing. He finds it, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't throw it away, but he doesn't look at it with peace or acceptance either. He holds it for a moment, and then the camera moves on. The show is depicting the specific paralysis of grief that hasn't been processed. Not acute grief, not the fresh grief of the immediate aftermath, but the older grief that has calcified into something you carry without knowing you're carrying it until you find a picture in your wallet. When Simon tells Finn he misses being the Ice King sometimes, the show doesn't have Finn challenge this, or correct it, or offer a perspective about how he's better off now. Finn listens. The show lets the admission stand. This is important, because the impulse in a lot of narratives, especially children's narratives, is to immediately redirect that kind of statement, to push the character toward the right perspective, to clarify that the curse was bad, and freedom is good, and he should be grateful. The show doesn't do this. It lets Simon say the complicated thing, and it lets the complicated thing be complicated. He's not wrong to feel what he feels. He's not exhibiting a symptom that needs correcting. He's being honest about a real dimension of what recovery from something that terrible actually involves. The multiverse travel structure of the season works as a kind of externalization of Simon's internal journey. He's literally traveling through multiple possible worlds while doing the internal work of understanding which world he actually wants to live in. The show is pretty explicit about this. The season finale confirmation that Fiona and Cake's world is in Simon's head is also a statement about the Simon story. All of this has been happening in Simon's head. The quest through multiple universes, the various versions of the story he encounters, the Choose Your Own Adventure book. These are all ways of showing him different possible versions of his own story, different ways the same events could have unfolded, different outcomes from different choices. He's not just traveling through alternate universes. He's considering his own life from multiple angles simultaneously. The specific version of his story that breaks him open is the bus stop. The moment when he realizes that the pattern in Casper and Nova's relationship, Casper consistently choosing proximity to Nova over Nova's freedom, is his pattern. That he loved Betty completely and also didn't fully see her. Both things, simultaneously, undeniably true. I want to be precise about what the show is and isn't saying here, because it's easy to misread. The show is not saying Simon was abusive or controlling, or that the relationship was bad. It's saying something much smaller and much more human, that he had a blind spot, a specific, understandable, enormously common blind spot that people in love regularly have, which is the tendency to substitute their presence for their partner's freedom without fully realizing that's what they're doing. Simon wanted Betty nearby. Betty loved him enough to stay nearby. And neither of them fully registered at the time that this was costing Betty something, that the trips she didn't take and the research she didn't do because she stayed were real losses. Quiet losses, absorbed without drama, but real. This is not a catastrophic revelation. It's not the discovery of something monstrous. It's the discovery of something ordinary. The ordinary ways that love can be incomplete, even when it's genuine. And the show treats it with appropriate weight. Not as a devastating collapse of the love story, but as a piece of information that Simon needs to hold in order to fully let Betty go. Because if the relationship was perfect, and the only damage was done by the crown, then letting go is just pure loss, pure tragedy, with no lesson to be extracted. But if Simon can see the ways the relationship was incomplete, not as a reason to invalidate it, but as a way of understanding it more fully, then letting go can be something other than pure devastation. It can be a step towards something better. Betty's response to Simon's realization is not, "You were terrible," or "You hurt me." It's, "I don't regret any of it." That's the specific absolution the scene offers. And it's real absolution, rather than performed absolution. She's not saying it to make him feel better. She's saying it because it's true. She chose him. She made her choices with full knowledge of who he was, and who she was, and what the costs were. And she doesn't wish them undone. The relationship was what it was, including the blind spot. And it was still real, and it still mattered, and she would still jump through the portal. Simon receiving that, actually receiving it, letting it land, not immediately pushing back with, "But I should have done better," is the actual emotional work of the scene. The ability to receive love and absolution without immediately deflecting is a specific skill that people in recovery often have to develop. Simon has to learn to let Betty's gift be a gift rather than a burden, to let her peace with the situation be actual peace rather than something he has to argue her out of because he hasn't forgiven himself yet. He has to stop trying to undo the past and start living in the present she bought for him. And then he throws the crown away. Not with ceremony, not with a speech. He just throws it. And it's gone. And then he writes a book. Expansion Block H. What the story means. Expand the closing analysis. There's one more thing I want to say about the broader meaning of Simon's arc, and it's something I've been circling around this whole video without quite landing on directly. Adventure Time, at its core, is a show about what comes after the end of the world. Literally, it's set in the ruins of civilization, but also figuratively. It's a show about what you do after the worst thing has already happened. How do you build something in the ruins? How do you keep being a person in a world that has been fundamentally broken? How do you love something when love itself can be dangerous? How do you stay yourself when everything around you is trying to make you into something else? Simon is the show's deepest answer to these questions, the character whose arc most completely addresses what after the end of the world actually means. He didn't just survive the end of civilization. He survived the end of himself. He was erased and came back. He lost 1,000 years and got them back. He lost the person who gave them back to him. And he's still here, in Fiona and Cake, on a grey morning, with ice in his glass, with a picture in his wallet that he doesn't know what to do with yet. The show's answer to what do you do is not triumphant. It's not heroic in any dramatic sense. The answer is, you write a choose-your-own-adventure book. You make something. You give the people in your story the choices you never had. You take what you learned from everything that happened to you, and you put it in a form that someone else can hold. You make something that might last. This is, I think, the most honest possible answer to the question. Not, you heal completely. The show doesn't suggest Simon is completely healed, and it would ring false if it did. Not, you find a new love and move on. That would cheapen what Betty was. Not, you learn to be happy with what you have. That's too tidy. The answer is, you make something. You put something in the world. You say, I was here. I survived this. Here is what I learned. Here is a story I wrote about it. Here is a world with multiple paths, because the world I lived in had none. And then someone reads it. 1,000 years later. A small girl who came to your exhibit, asking about your fan fiction stories, finds your book and the idea it contains, and makes it her own. And the story becomes the story's own continuation. And Simon Petrikov, who recorded his own disappearance on tape so that people would know his story, finds that his story didn't end with him. It kept going, into other people's imaginations, into other people's futures, making way into the world, taking everything it had. That's the ending. Not a resolution, a continuation. The story doesn't end with Simon. It passes through Simon and comes out the other side, changed by the passage, still moving. Casper and Nova. A choose-your-own-adventure. Infinite paths. The ordinary anchor of a song about belonging, still playing, somewhere in Fiona and Cake's world, still on the television when Simon turns it on in the morning. Making your way in the world today, takes everything you've got. He had everything. He gave it. He got himself back. And then he gave the story to someone else. And the story kept going. And that is more than enough. That is everything. That is Simon Petrikov. Expansion. Block 1. Additional depth on Tom Kenny's performance and the show's confidence. There's something I haven't said directly yet about what makes this story work technically. And I want to say it because it's easy to take for granted, and it shouldn't be. Tom Kenny's performance across this entire arc, from the early Ice King comedy through the tapes, through the various Simon returns, through Fiona and Cake, is one of the most sustained and disciplined pieces of character work in animation. Not because any individual moment is the greatest thing ever done in a recording booth, but because of the consistency and the continuity and the specific choice to never let the Ice King performance signal the Simon depth underneath it. Kenny plays two people who share one body. The Ice King, theatrical, wobbling, self-important, slightly too loud, pitched upward at the ends of sentences. Simon, quiet, careful, precise, the specific quality of someone conserving what's left of themselves. Both performances are complete in themselves. Neither one contains the other. And the transitions between them, the moments when Golb strips the crown, when Bella Noche strips the magic, when something shifts the Ice King into Simon, are always the same shift. Always the same going quiet. Always the same taking stock quality. Kenny found a version of Simon in 2011, and he's maintained it consistently across a decade of occasional appearances, which is a technical feat that rarely gets discussed. The voice acting in the tape scene specifically is also worth dwelling on. Ward described it as old-time radio horror drama, and that's precise. There's a quality in Kenny's Simon delivery that reads as real documentary audio, something captured rather than performed. He's not doing acting. He's doing something that sounds more like actual recorded speech, with the hesitations and the choosing of words that real speech contains, and performance usually smooths out. The imperfections in the rhythm of Simon's tape monologue feel like the imperfections of someone talking who is thinking about what they're saying as they say it, not reading a script they've already decided on. It makes the tapes feel found rather than written, which is exactly what they need to feel. And the show, built across a decade of episodes, maintained this. It never gave you a moment that broke the mythology. It never had the Ice King do something that retroactively damaged Simon's dignity. It held the tragedy intact across hundreds of episodes that had nothing to do with the tragedy, kept it in reserve, allowed it to deepen in the background while the comedy ran in the foreground. That requires a specific kind of long-range planning and a specific kind of trust that the payoffs are worth the patience required to reach them. Most shows don't trust like that. Most shows take the emotional material and spend it as soon as they have it, because the pressure to deliver is constant and the temptation to use what you have is overwhelming. Adventure Time held Simon's story back. It gave you pieces, slowly, across seasons, trusting that each piece would accumulate into something larger than the sum of its parts. And it was right. The sum of the parts. Holly, Jolly Secrets, I Remember You, Simon and Marcy, Betty, Come Along With Me, Fiona and Cake, is enormous. It's a complete human story, told in fragments across a decade of animation, and every fragment lands harder because of all the fragments that came before it. That's what Simon Petrikov's story is. That's what Adventure Time did with it. And that's why, even after all these years and all these words, the Cheers theme still makes me feel something I don't have words for. Simon in an office chair in the ruins, scat singing to make a child laugh, making your way in the world today, with what he had, with everything he had. Good night.